Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this special live event commemorating the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, the day, the 30th of January 1972, when British paratroopers opened fire and killed 13 people dead on the streets of Derry, one later dying of his injuries, most of them shot while trying to run or crawl away from the army at a huge civil rights march that was taking place in Derry that day. My name's Colin Bryce. I'm a socialist currently based in Glasgow, but I was born and grew up in Derry. And tonight I'm delighted to be joined by two people who have played a very important role in the campaign for justice for Bloody Sunday for the last 50 years. First is Kate Nash, whose brother William Nash was shot and killed on Bloody Sunday, and whose father Alex was shot twice and wounded trying to go and help William. On the anniversary 2 days ago, Kate helped organise an enormous demonstration of, I think, well over 10,000 people, which demanded the prosecution of the people responsible for ordering the killing that day, and challenged Boris Johnson's plans to introduce a blanket amnesty for British soldiers. The second is Eamon McCann, an author, journalist and socialist activist in Derry. Eamon was a prominent leader of the civil rights movement and one of the organisers of the original Bloody Sunday March in 1972. Eamon also wrote one of the first eyewitness accounts of Bloody Sunday in the days and weeks afterwards, which challenged all the lies that were being told by the British state and the cover-up of the Widgery Tribunal, which exonerated the soldiers. He's the author of the classic War in an Irish Town, about the early years of the conflict in the north, and Bloody Sunday in Derry, What Really Happened. Eamon also attended almost every day of the 12-year-long Savile inquiry, which eventually declared what the people of Derry already knew, that the people who were killed and injured on Bloody Sunday were entirely innocent. And he's also written extensively on the limitations of the Savile report. And we're also, of course, joined by you at home. Tonight we're streaming on Facebook and YouTube, and I can see hundreds of people are already tuned in. And if you're watching from home, please click like, share, and subscribe because this helps the event reach even more people. Kate and Eamon, you're both very, very welcome to the meeting. As I'm sure you both know very well, the British state, the British establishment, is never very keen to talk about its role in the north of Ireland and atrocities like Bloody Sunday. And as a result, a lot of people can know very, very little about Bloody Sunday, only the barest details of what happened that day. And I wonder if we could begin by asking each of you to recall what the day of Bloody Sunday itself was like for each of you. Eamon, could I maybe start with you? I think, I believe you were at Free Derry Corner in the Bogside, where the speeches were just beginning at the end of the rally on Bloody Sunday when the paratroopers raced into Roswell Street and began to open fire. Could you maybe tell us what that was like and what it was like as it happened?
Well, I was, as you say, sort of near Free Derry Corner, and for those who don't know, I mean, Free Derry Corner is if you go into the Bogside, the main artery into the Bogside is Rossville Street, Lecky Road. And I was walking up Rossville Street towards the platform at what's now known as Free Derry Wall. And I remember sort of like the speakers were already on the platform. There's a riot going on behind me, but we had riots all the time. It was a weekly event. And I can honestly say, this might sound flippant, but I can honestly say that nobody paid much attention. I was down at the riot, as it were. And I began walking up towards the platform, as were hundreds of others. We were streaming up towards the platform. And the speakers on the platform were Fenner Brockway, might be remembered, was a very old man even then, sort of one of the leaders and founders of the Movement for Colonial Freedom, a very sounds old-fashioned, that, but it was a very fine organisation in its day. And Ivan Cooper, sort of a local MP, the Reverend Terence McCaughey, who was a Protestant minister based in Dublin, and Bernadette. That was the platform party, as it were. So you can see it was quite broad, very broad. The last thing I remember walking down, I was about 100 yards, maybe 120 yards from the platform, and Bernadette had just taken the microphone, and I heard the first few words that she said. But before she could complete a sentence, we heard the crack, 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 crack of the bullets from the bottom of Roswell Street. And like everybody else in the vicinity, it took me a minute or two to understand what was happening. I didn't throw myself down immediately. I mean, I looked behind me. Bewilderment was my first. A reaction to it. Then I threw myself down, and I could see behind me when I craned my neck around, I could see people jumping over this low rubble barricade. It was no more than 3 feet high. It wasn't a big thing, maybe 4. I'd see young men sort of jump over it, and my most vivid memory of that is of somebody stumbling over the top of this little barricade, stepping down the other side, and suddenly stiffening. And there's a back arching backwards. And then he fell, sort of. And it actually didn't occur to me at that time that what had happened was that he'd been killed or hit by a bullet. It really didn't, even though there was gunfire going on, because I didn't piece it together. And so I managed to crawl away, as did many, many others, of course, sort of on my elbows, pushing myself along my elbows, literally in the gutter, and propelled myself along the street until we came to the bottom of Westland Street. Well, there was a bit of cover. I could go in, and there was about 100 people in there sheltering in the highway, and I joined them, because the bullets couldn't reach us in there. And basically, the rest of the day unfolded. The whole period in the day, when that happened, just around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I can remember all that sort of from, I suppose, about 5:30. When I wandered off, I can't remember anything after that. Next thing I remember, it really is a very odd experience. For the memory of something that's just happened, you suddenly leave your mind, because the next thing I can remember being in the house of a journalist called Nell McCafferty, just 150 yards away. And like everybody else, I was crammed into the hallway. In those days, not everybody had phones. Nell was one of the few houses on Beechwood Street where she lived, which would have had a phone. So we're all crowded into the doorway into the hall of Nell's house, and Bernadette, because she was an MP and all, we were looking at how many people had died. Some people said 4, some people said 5. Did you hear so-and-so's among the dead? So-and-so was hit by a bullet. What about Mrs. Somebody's wee fella? All that. Bernadette phoned the hospital. And I remember saying, I do remember this, and her saying very decisively to them, I'm a member of Parliament. I'm entitled to know. I want the names of the people. It's very bossy as she had to be in that circumstance. And she started writing down the names. And this is the thing I remember most about Bloody Sunday, is that Bernadette writing out the names of the dead, standing in the hall packed sort of with people, and the silence becoming heavier as she just kept on writing. With that tifo, she just kept on writing names. And basically, that's my most vivid, that scene in the Cafferty's house on Beechwood Street is the single most vivid thing that I can remember, because I can remember, you hear about people freezing. I can remember actually sort of standing there paralyzed, and everybody else was looking at one another or looking out, and people crowding around at the door to, crane their heads in. What's happening? What's going on? What's this wee bit of excitement about? That's Bloody Sunday, as far as I can recall.
Good to see that. Thanks very much. And Kate, what about yourself? What do you remember about the day and sort of how you found out about what had happened to Willie and your father?
Well, I was at a boyfriend's house, and it was around 5 o'clock. I was seeing that on the news about people being killed, and maybe 3 people at that stage. And I was kind of very shocked at that, but I didn't have any concerns, because you just never think something like this is going to come to your door, but around 7 o'clock, the door did knock. And when we opened it, it was a friend of mine, a neighbour, to say, Willie, your brother Willie's been shot dead, and your father's been wounded too, but he's okay, he's in the hospital, and going home was just a nightmare that evening. And I was just taken straight into my uncle's van. I never did quite get in home. And I know other members of the family were there, Charlie, and I know Margaret was there, not sure who else, but taken over to the hospital, and being stopped on Craigavon Bridge by the RUC, who one of them started to taunt my brother Charlie, and Charlie, of course, had to be held back, because he was so upset. Charlie generally wouldn't respond, but you're talking about a dead brother, But over to the hospital we went, and I went up to my father. I had to walk all the floors because Margaret wouldn't get into the loft. Every floor, people were crying, doctors, nurses, every single floor. There was so much upset. And when I got to my father, he still hadn't, he had his arm held up, and you could see the wound. it hadn't been treated, you know. And I said to him, "Is that sore, Dad?" And he just answered, "Well, he's in the morgue," you know. That's what I remember about that day.
Thanks very much, Kate. Could we maybe just go on, because very, very quickly after the killings, the cover up began. The lies started being pumped out. You know, the General Ford, who was on the ground that day, gave an interview to the TV and said, you know, sort of that they only responded to being fired upon, that 200 shots had been fired, and all these sorts of things. I'm just wondering, Kate, maybe if we could come back to you. You know, sort of what did that feel like in the immediate aftermath of it, when you started hearing what the British Army and the press were saying about Willie and your father and the other victims?
Well, I wouldn't have been aware of anything, to be honest with you, Colin. Not until after after the whole wake and funeral was over, and still wasn't taking much. And my mother was coming out of hospital, and she hadn't made a sound since the news was broke there on the day of Willie's funeral. They both my parents were in hospital at the time, so basically it was me and, you know, some of my brothers, but they were married and stuff, so I would have been sort of in charge of the house, if you like. But a neighbour really took over for me and told me to just greet people at the door. You know, I wouldn't have had a clue how to deal with that. But yes, the newspapers and stuff started. There was a report that we were a pro-Republican violent family, you know, and to still say it, nothing could have been further from the truth. They said that we lived in squalor. We didn't. And they said that we weren't close to my father. So this was to kind of pinpoint my father as implying he was a bad man. We weren't close to him, you know. Absolutely untrue. Sorry.
You're okay, Kate. Eamon, how did you feel about that? Did you have a sense of that beginning straight away?
Out there by the phone call. So sorry.
Okay.
But
sorry, Kate.
It was that Betty Doherty.
All right.
Can you hear
Very
me?
Good. I can, Shirley. Go ahead. Sorry.
I can hardly hear you, Colin.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll try and get myself turned up a bit. Is that any better, Kate?
No, you're still.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Don't know what that is. God. I'll ask Nathan to see if he can fix that out. But go ahead, Kate. Finish what you were going to say.
Me, okay.
I can hear you.
I could just
it's
keep
brilliant.
talking,
It's brilliant.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's fantastic. I'll try and speak up a wee bit.
Yeah, okay. Yes, the press had that report that we were pro-Republican violent family, that we lived in squalor and that we weren't close to our father, you know, which was complete lies, complete and utter lies. And do you see, even today, those things hurt. But along came my mother. You know, I'll always remember, and I have to tell you this, Colin, you may have heard me before.
Sure.
Vivid memory for me was my mother coming home, and she'd been silent up to then, you know. And she put a foot over the step and she started to scream and wail Willie's name, you know, Willie, Willie, Willie. And, you know, that screaming went on for an awful long time, you know, but it's something I'll never forget, you know, the heartbreak you could, I mean, you could just hear the total heartbreak, you know, and it tore the heart out of me, to tell you the truth. But yes, all those stories in the press, demonizing my family, who had nothing to do with nothing. You know, they were just, my brothers were sports people, you know, as you know, and my father was a simple man who worked in the docks, you know, never was in trouble in his life. They said that he had an extensive criminal record. And you know what, even today, it was the first thing that was said when we went into a civil court, which hasn't finished yet, that my father had never had a criminal record. He was fined one time for not having a Muslim, one of his great times, way long time ago, you know. But that was it. That was it. So to do that, you know, it shows you the control that the government had over the press when they were when they were writing that sort of thing, about, and I know we weren't the only family that were attacked, but that's the only one that I know the detail of. We were hurting. My father went to the Widgery Tribunal, and to be honest, I have to tell you, I wasn't really aware of it. It was only when afterwards, because we didn't talk at home, about anything. My mother would have broke down, and he just simply didn't want to hurt her, So therefore, we didn't even talk to one another, which probably in hindsight would have been a comfort, really.
Sure.
But we still had young kids in the house. I mean, Linda was only 13, Michael was 12, so not being able to talk, I think everyone just, we were just steeped in our own misery, if you like, But my father, apparently, the only thing I know about it is they said there were nail bombers, gunmen. I think it was heavily implied my brother was a gunman. They told my father that Lord Ridgery, that he didn't know his son. And I know my father was escorted out, so he may have maybe made a go for Ridgery. I don't know.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me. It's not that he's a violent man, but he would have stood up to, something like that he would react to. But he was escorted out anyway, and that was all I knew about Widgery, except that they blamed the victims, and made the soldiers look. The victims really were blamed for their own deaths, So
of course,
that was the Widgery Tribunal.
Yeah. Eamon, could you maybe tell us a bit about that and what you were feeling, because you began writing, straight away about what had happened, because it seemed that you could already see the lies being repeated in the press and the Parliament and so on about people being gunmen and nail bombers and all that sort of stuff. How did you feel about that in the run up to the Widgery Tribunal, which exonerated the soldiers? What was your feeling about?
Well, the thing to keep in mind about about all that and reactions to it, and media reactions to it, and all the rest of it, is that we all knew what had happened. One of the curious things, not curious, but sort of unusual things, or not untypical things, atypical things about Bloody Sunday is that it happened in broad daylight. It happened on, as Christy was singing in the song there, a lovely bright winter's day. I remember it was like a very crisp, and the sky was completely blue. One of those winter days that a great day for a walk. So we had seen it all, and you see, the shooting happened after as people crowded into the area from a civil rights march, which on exactly the same route as we took 2 days ago on Sunday. So there were thousands of people crammed into this area. Some of them had reached up where the platform where the meeting was to take place, others still drifting up Roswell Street, and then scurrying if they could, rushing for shelter. So every killing and wounding on Bloody Sunday was witnessed by a large number of people, sometimes at very close quarters. So the idea that we needed, we knew between ourselves, between everybody in the area when we talked, and our eyewitness testimony together, and there you had it. We knew what had happened. So and we knew sort of what was being said was wrong, because the cover-up didn't begin with Widgery, really. He had his first session in the beginning of, I forget, that was a few weeks after Bloody Sunday. But within hours of Bloody Sunday, the lies were coming out of the radio sets. There's British soldiers, British officers, just giving an entirely fictitious and lying account of what had happened. At 1 o'clock in the morning, on the BBC Home Service, as I think we called it then, Maurice Tugwell, I think it was, he was a British Army's chief spokesperson in Northern Ireland, based in Lisburn, headquarters Northern Ireland, when he came out and gave a detailed account of the shooting. Now, this, as it turned out, was based on a list of shots fired, which had been provided by Captain Michael Jackson. He was the second in command of the Paras in the Bogside that day, second in command to Lieutenant Colonel Derek Wolford, and he produced this thing on radio, which listed 14 what they call engagements. Sort of find out where, with the map references to where the shooter was, where the target was, what the target was doing, holding a nail bomb or reaching, it could have been a pistol, all that, a sort of very detailed account, allegedly, of every shot fired was available by 1 a.m. the next morning, via the British Army spokesperson. Every single shot that they described was fictitious. Not one of them. This is an interesting thing. You would think sort of all these lines of fire, that just by the law of averages or by accident, they would get one line of fire of all this correct. Not one of them. Not one of the shots actually fired conformed to the shots described, sort of in the immediate aftermath. And that list of the shot list was sent overnight to every British Army, every British embassy and consulate in the world. It was sent out by telex and all sorts of things as a guide to answer questions from local media. If they ask, what's all this about? Tell us what happened in Derry, all these people were killed. So that was out there sort of immediately. The cover-up was underway immediately. And as I say, sort of, we know now that we denied it for year after year after year. We know now, for all sorts of, take too long to go into it, semi-accidental way, we know for a fact that he doesn't deny it, that all this was written out in his own hand by Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson afterwards, of course, became the chief of staff of the British Army, the top soldier in the whole army. He had risen through the ranks. He's also had been head of NATO forces in Kosovo. He was the chief of the British Army on the Rhine. All these very heavy areas of responsibility after Bloody Sunday. And you might ask yourself, well, this man's a proven liar and all this here. How come he rules high? It's because he was a proven liar. It's because he told all these lies about the Bogside, and before that about a massacre in Ballymurphy the previous August. He was rewarded. Michael Jackson was the British Army's scene of crime clean-up man. That's what he was. So he was quite crucial to the whole thing. He's still around. If you'll occasionally see him on Newsnight or Channel 4 News talking about the Middle East or something and warfare and giving his expert sort of account of it, sort of with regret for the very humanitarian man he comes across, like a bastard and a killer. Or, so that's with regard to the propaganda coming out. I think it's important to understand that propaganda isn't something that grew over time. It was there. The smoke had scarcely cleared from Rossville Street when the propaganda cover-up was underway. They're quick at it and they're good at it. Mind you, they had centuries of practice. Of course.
And can we maybe sort of move on? I know it's taking a bit of a leap forward, but like the Widgery report was the official version of events that the government relied on at the time, but it was in place. That was the official version for 38 years. And I wonder if we could maybe start talking about how that was shifted over those years. How did the campaign get underway? How did people eventually sort of begin to gather the strength for it? And Kate, could you maybe tell us a bit about that, about the start of the Relatives campaign for justice and what it was like at the start? What sort of support you got? Did you get much support from politicians in Ireland, for example, or politicians in England? Or, was it a very isolated sort of...
It was isolated, yes. Mm-hmm. Every door was closed in our face, or many doors was closed in our faces in those days, but we persisted. Now, I personally had nothing to do with it at the start because I thought the Provisional IRA were involved. Well, that's what I called them. Maybe they were called Sinn Féin then, I don't know. But I thought they were involved, so I wouldn't touch it, So I think one of my sisters actually was there at the time. Margaret, she was in the meeting, of families, and I think there was only ever 7 or 8, maybe 9, who met regularly, but even paying the rent, they could hardly pay the rent, it was even hard getting that bit of money together. But eventually, I mean, they started to make headway. I remember Margaret saying about them being escorted out of Dublin. So we weren't welcome, and I don't know why. You don't know why that would happen, why they would have that attitude. Something terrible that happened, and people simply looking, for justice. Now, we never actually campaigned, Colin, although it's said around, but it's not true. We never actually campaigned for an inquiry. It was three demands we had, which was the repudiation of witchery, the declaration of innocence, which was very important, and prosecutions was the third. Well, Savile's report brought that, but that's all it brought was an apology, you know. And I must admit he did a good job, but I wasn't looking for an apology, and I think most of them families weren't looking for an apology. They wanted justice, you know. However, I mean, since that, we had a few saying, you know, that they weren't interested in prosecutions, you know, that was, somebody actually said at the time, this is as good as it gets, you know. But that would have been one of the lead sort of spokesmen, you know. No, I never would, you know, when they stopped the march, when Sinn Féin stopped that marching the 39th year, because they seemed to control everything. They were always there or abouts, you know. So I always felt that it was controlled, you know, because every time you disagreed with something, you basically ignored, you know, and we sort of just fell out in the end, you know, just before the Savile inquiry, you know. Right. But we still what?
Sorry, but can I maybe take it, like, because I remember. So I think it must have been very, very difficult at the beginning. I really understand that, you know, and not being welcome anywhere or taken seriously anywhere. But there's no doubt that over the years that the support for the campaign really built. I mean, some of the big demonstrations before the Savile inquiry was announced, some of those demonstrations were absolutely enormous. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
Did you have that feeling that you were making headway, that you were putting the British government under pressure, that you were? Do you know? Is that how it felt to you, or in the run to Savile?
Not really. I really didn't, but it was something to be doing, you know. I really only sort of came under the campaign. I looked after my father for the last 7 years of his life, and looked after my mother before that, but she died in 1979. And I couldn't really do anything, you know. I was there all the time, and I couldn't do anything really until, but Linda had obviously joined that campaign then. But my father died then in 1999, and the inquiry was just started. Wasn't it just in 1998? So I was able to join it almost immediately, and you know, start going to the inquiry. And I have to say, a lot of that stuff went over my head, you know. But to tell you the truth, I was surprised when this inquiry started. But I know there was some kind of a break. I don't know if it was a summer thing. I can't remember. June. We got in June, but this was earlier. I think around March. The conclusions were ready, but they were kept in Savile's office. I mean, because some of the leading spokespeople again said that they thought it was safe in Savile's office. You know. Right. I never.
Very curious.
It was that safe that the MOD was in there for something like a fortnight, perusing, you know, all the material. So you could see from that, I mean, we were being led, you know, people were making decisions that we weren't getting an awful lot of time to digest or to think about, you know.
Sure.
So that's when I sort of started to lose faith in them. But however, they did come out in June then, and on the 15th of June, and I know some that's the date, June 15, that some would celebrate, you know. But there's no celebration from that. That was a very poor report, and it was actually I think devised to make it look like, it did. 9 rogue soldiers, lowly officer. But they done nothing, you know. The British government, we are so sorry about that, you know. They did it all. Those men were ordered in that day, and they were ordered in to kill. They were also, I mean, there was stuff that was never looked at, that there was a lot of evidence about. The fact that soldiers were on the walls shooting. Lots of people seen that. You know, people heard like, in Enfield, those sniper guns, and people heard that, the sound that it makes. Lots of things really that were left out, of being investigated, that probably had it been investigated, Savile may have looked a whole lot different, or but I think there was a lot of bad advice given. A lot of bad advice, or families putting their faith in people really they shouldn't have, and I always just see the whole thing as a big fix, big fix.
Okay. Eamon, sorry, just before I come to you, and I get your thoughts on the campaign and the Savile inquiry, because I think you attended so much of it. I just want to report that there's over 300 people watching us this evening, and I would encourage people to keep liking and clicking and sharing. And you're also very welcome to post comments in the under the comments as well. Eamon, I wonder, could I ask you sort of about your impression? You were a part of the campaign for so many years and decades. What was your feeling about sort of how it was received in sort of the circles of power in the South, or sort of in Britain? Do you have what do you think it was? What do you think the calculation of the Blair government, for example, was that to launch the inquiry and so on?
Well, I think of the calculation of the Blair government. Remember, Blair had just come in. It was one of the first things that he faced, and Blair actually sent a number of journalists, including Murray Sale of the Sunday Times, Australian guy, brilliant journalist. I forget, Peter Pringle, sort of the Sunday Times, and various others. He actually sent emissaries to meet them. I mentioned those two because they were working in America at the time. So Blair did want to get sort of as much insight into the thing as he could, or as he felt was necessary for his purposes. And so when Blair he announced, it's significant that Blair announced the appointment of the Savile and this new inquiry. He announced that in January 1998, just after he had come in. That was immediately after the election, and I won't go into these serpentine and Byzantine sort of politics of Southern Ireland. Sort of began explaining that, and how we'd be here all night. But the Savile inquiry everybody was immediately told, and in a way, sort of this is just normal, natural, that everybody could shut up now, because we had this new inquiry, the lessons of the Widgery, the phony inquiry started from 1972. Those lessons had been learned. There would be no repeat. Indeed, the very fact that a new inquiry had been instituted implicitly was a repudiation of Widgery, and that gave an awful lot of people a bit of faith in it. It's and which is a paradoxical thing, because it discouraged people from cynicism about the Savile inquiry. And looking by, one of the things that I really haven't figured out, and tell you I will, sort of if I get enough time to write more about it, is that the enormous amount of evidence that was collected by Savile. It took 900 statements from civilian witnesses. That's a lot. I mean, there were teams of solicitors over from London and all in different rooms around the bauxite, taking all these, a very, very elaborate sort of effort to do it. The tribunal sat for 404 days, spread over about 4 years. They went to London to hear the soldiers' evidence. We were in London for about 18 months and so forth. And you have to, there'd be two explanations for that, that they were assiduously seeking the truth. The other explanation would be that they were putting on a show. And that's not being too cynical, but they had this show, they had declared to the world, we're really making an effort here. And because of that, and that went right to, and then when the Savile published his report, and as Kate said, the 15th of June 2010, and the report came out, and he declared that all the dead and the wounded, with one exception, he was left a great shadow over, but all the rest were innocent. So that was the headline, innocent, and that was widely welcomed, in Ireland, and was welcomed because it was seen to be the end of the affair. You know, this terrible thing had happened. Now the truth had been told, sort of, by a British Supreme, whatever it was, High Court judge. So there's no need for any further campaigning. There was no need for any further marching. There were people going around Derry, sort of, including people who were relatives of the dead, you know, and saying, literally going around doors and saying to other families, this is as good as it gets. We've got all this. There's no need for any more shouting and roaring. Now, there were a few people, Kate was one of them, I said, no, this isn't as good as it gets. You know, sort of, it wasn't just sort of a bunch of rank and file paras who had done this. That's not enough, just telling them what they did physically and where they were. Who ordered them to do it? Who sent them into the box? Knowing sort of what was, it's certain to, you know, it was almost certain to happen. They ought to have known. These are the parachute regiment, you know, from the Crater district in Aden. They've just come back from there, slaughtering people and helping to create Yemen as it is today. Sort of, you know, and that was, they say, go for the office. It was all rank and file guys. You know, with one exception, was Lieutenant Colonel Derek Wilford. Lieutenant Colonel was a mid-ranking officer, well, a wee bit above the average. And it would be great for the British ruling class and so on, and the army chiefs and so on, if they were able to say, as they did say, and as David Cameron said, these terrible things happen, but there's no stain on the reputation of the British Army as a whole. There's no stain on the reputation of the parachute regiment. It's just that, in that case, a dozen rogue soldiers have gone in and done all that. It's a perfect result. Think about it for the Brits. We're off the hook. Nothing to do with us. We've got clean hands. All these rogues did it. The families, happy. They anticipated sort of with the result because people had been tired. Everybody happy. That was the intention of it. I'll leave it go on too long, but I didn't deal with this thing. If you look at the Tribunal of Inquiry Evidence Act, which is 1921, it was incidentally the last act passed in Westminster, which was to apply to the whole of Ireland. This was just before partition. There's interesting implications of that, but the intention of it, the preamble to that act, it says the intention of the act is to restore confidence in the state. It's black and white. It says that. If you look at the debate, it's in Westminster in 1921. Wasn't a lot much debate, but there was a couple of days debate. They're absolutely explicit. This is to restore confidence. You do this inquiry to restore confidence in the state, implicitly by punishing the wrongdoers or whatever. But that's the overall intention. And I would imagine sort of that in the year since 2010. When the report came out, that they're pretty happy that they have done that, or they think they have. They think they have. Yeah. They've restored confidence. Look, we owned up. We held this big inquiry. What more do you want? 404 witnesses. Oh, yeah, 200 million quid. For fuck's sake, shut up. You know, stop whinging. You know, that was basically the line. You know,
sure.
To clear things up. So that's my immediate thoughts on it.
Very good. I want to come back to both of you then about, you know, and sort of actually backtrack and look at Bloody Sunday. And like, if that's wrong, and I absolutely agree with you, that presentation of Bloody Sunday as an isolated incident, you know, and a one-off tragedy, then, you know, sort of what actually was the impact and the role of Bloody Sunday in the British state. But before I do that, I'd really like to read out. So we're getting some very nice messages in on the chat here, and I've got a message here from Dave in Glasgow, and he said, my first meeting of the International Socialists was going to hear Bernadette speak to a huge rally in the wake of Bloody Sunday in early 1972 in Glasgow's Woodside Halls, a meeting I'll remember all my life, not least for Bernadette's passionate speech about working class solidarity versus British imperialism. Paul from London says, solidarity, very moving account of the shootings and the foul propaganda of the British Army. John from Liverpool says, there are so many similarities to Hillsborough. Blame the victims and cover-ups that go right to the top. There's no British justice. And Mandy says, solidarity with Kate and all the families of those murdered. Eamon, so could I maybe come back to you if you don't mind, Kate? Just that question of, if it's not an isolated incident, how do you explain Bloody Sunday? How do you explain why the parachute regiment were sent in? What was their role in the north of Ireland at the time? What explains why those decisions were taken by generals or politicians to actually do this? And what was the impact then? How did that affect sort of things subsequently?
Well, one lead first. Sorry, go on, Kate.
You know,
go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
I'm still stunned by it all, and I would still question why. I don't understand. I don't understand why they perpetuated a war, because they certainly did that. They perpetuated in this country. They kept it going. I don't know why, and I say that now, I question myself even, you know, why would they come in here and for 30 years, something like that, they kill people, they come in undercover, they send in undercover soldiers to behave as terrorists, shoot by killings, innocent Protestants, Catholics, and as Eamon always says, imply then that it's two warring tribes, that we hate each other and they're keeping the peace. They're trying to protect us all. Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. I believe, and they constantly sing that they only killed only 10%. Only 10% would be an awful lot. But I feel that they were responsible for a hell of a lot more. And this is why the cover-up continues, because I believe that's why they fight too for an amnesty, because somebody at some time's going to say something, that's going to, some soldier maybe, hope, and that's going to blow it wide open, and they'll start saying what exactly was happening in Ireland and stuff like that, stuff that maybe we should know. But no, they perpetuated that war. Other people should ask why too.
Eamon, what about yourself? What's your own thoughts?
Well, if you read the memos and the communiques, whatever they're called, sort of military communications, sort of in the say month before Bloody Sunday, I mean, you get a sense of what the mindset was of the officer class sort of within the parachute regiment, and then the operation on sort of the British Army, a presence in Northern Ireland generally, and a number of things come out of it. One of the ones that are most, there's all sorts of things, but as far as I'm concerned, sort of the most crucial, a defining aspect of Bloody Sunday and the attitude of the British Army is that what they objected to most, what enraged them, was not really the IRA. If you look at all the ammo, of course, they wanted to get rid of the IRA and fight the IRA, gun them down, blah, 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 and all that there. But repeatedly, you find memos from Robert Ford, General Robert Ford, who was the commander of land forces, in fact, number 2 soldier in Northern Ireland, when he talks about the no-go area in Derry. And for those who don't know, I mean, since internment the previous August, it was August 1971, their barricades have been thrown up around the Bogside for a very clear reason, to stop snatch squads coming in and dragging people off. There are about 30 people in Derry have been dragged off to imprisonment without trial in August 1971. So there were barricades up around the place. And within that, it wasn't IRA run really or anything like that. The IRA was quite 2 IRAs, the officials and the provost were openly on display, if you like. But it was the fact that the hooligans had taken over. That's direct quote from Ford. He sent a memo around other officers from Belfast. He came on a recce to Derry, a reconnaissance mission to Derry in the first week of January 1972. Went back to Belfast and wrote memos, which fair play to Saffel published. And we read them, in which he attacks, he said, what he called the soft attitude of garrison regiments, which were based in Derry. The parties were brought from Belfast specifically on that day. They weren't based in Derry. And the Ford had went back to Belfast and organised. He asked Brigadier Frank Kitson, who was the Belfast Brigadier, the head of the army sort of in the Belfast area, to loan him the paratroopers for a trip to Derry. Can I have those boys? Please, he sent them down to Derry. And it was clear that the hooligans, he said it repeatedly, the hooligans, that's how he referred, wasn't it, or nationalists, Republicans, hooligans. I think that idea, what comes through all those memos, that the idea of hooligans, young, overwhelmingly male, working class punters sort of on the streets, taking over from the forces of law and order, not allowing the police or the army to come into the area, a part of the United Kingdom. That drove them mad. It contradicted every assumption that they had about good order and the way society ought to run. And I found that very interesting when I started reading over the documents to say, well, they are against the IRA. They say they're harbouring the IRA, but their main target from Ford in particular was the hooligans. We are being humiliated. That was his line about the hooligans. The Paris won't allow that to happen. They'll go on and teach these sort of cheeky blighters sort of a lesson. And that's what that's how the Paris came to be in Derry. So it's there's lots more surrounding facts sort of and all about it. But that's, I think, is a close context for the decision to send the paratroopers to Derry, with all the foreseeable results that we know.
Hey, Eamon, then just in terms of what the effect of Bloody Sunday was, what was the effect on the mass civil rights movement? What was the effect on Free Derry? What was the effect on growth and support for the IRA, for example, or do you know what I mean, or for other political measures? Did it have that sort of major impact?
It did.
Do you think?
Yeah, it had absolutely had a major impact. And a major impact, it stiffened resistance to the British, no question about that. I mean, people just anger and grief. I mean, and people who were, my father was a trade unionist all his life. He was a member of Derry Trade Union Council. A great political hero was an Oran Bevan with the Labour Party in the 1940s, Minister for Health at Westminster. I founded the National Health Service, etc., etc. You wouldn't be allowed to say a word against an Oran Bevan in our house, you know, sort of a British. You would have to remember, sort of a British politician. And so my father was not up to, and was not in favour of Republican armed action of any kind. He believed it should go with the trade union movement. Was an illusion, I would say. My father sort of in the trade union movement when I look back on it now. But I can recall him a few weeks after Bloody Sunday. I came back and the IRA just killed a soldier up in it doesn't matter at a factory, and so on. And I came in and said this to my father about 2 a.m. He said, I won't do him a damn bit of harm. You know, that's a very cold thing to say about the killing of a human being. And he wasn't like that. He wasn't like that at all. But that's sort of emblematic, if you like, of the reaction it was. There were other more complicated reactions among the ruling class in the south of Ireland, for example. There was very significant reaction and new attitudes, which were to last for decades and so on. But at a human level, I think it's sort of that's the effect that it had sort of on ordinary people in the north.
Mm-hmm. Just before we move on, and we're sort of getting close to the end here now, but I want to read out another, if it's okay, I'll read out another couple of comments and questions. Richard in London says Jackson was a senior officer at Ballymurphy 5 months before Bloody Sunday, where 11 people were killed, and that's the sort of record that lands a man the job as chief of the general staff of the British Army. Jan in London says the lies about Bloody Sunday had massive ramifications for Irish people living in Britain. It continued and consolidated the racism they experienced. In shops and public places, Irish people experienced rudeness and abuse. They were spat on and called terrorists. All the stereotype that Kate spoke about structured our lives here. And a question from James: how do you feel about the similarities in the powers granted by the upcoming policing bill in Westminster, which I think you might be aware of, that Johnson's trying to get through about banning demonstrations and so on, and the power that the British military had in the north during the Troubles? Maybe not that question directly, but could I maybe just take you on to the question of what the effect was in Britain? Because just to sort of sum up, I was wondering, like, it's almost predictable what the establishment did in terms of its closing of ranks, in terms of the lies that it propagated and so on. Far from it just being a handful of rogue soldiers, the whole of them closed ranks. But I wanted to talk about, sort of, when you talked about the British Labour Party, was there support in the British Labour Party? There are a few honourable people, obviously, like Tony Benn, Jeremy Corbyn, who gave the Bloody Sunday lecture this year, and so on, John McDonnell, and whatever. Some people in the trade union movement, and so on. Some people in socialist organisations, people involved in the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, the Justice for Grenfell campaign, people who had experienced the same thing. The Stephen Lawrence, campaigners and so on. But I'm just wondering how you would measure that, or what that solidarity felt like. Was it ever enough, and could more have been done? Kate, I wonder what you would think about that. Sort of, did you feel that there had been support, and should people have been doing something more? If you understand my question.
Yes, there should have been a lot more done, and there wasn't. I don't know the powers. I don't know how they operate, the powers that be. But it strikes me like ordinary people, ordinary working class people are just not considered important. And I'm not even sure about Jeremy Corbyn, to be honest with you. He's a very nice man. Seems like a very nice man, but but I don't know if he cared enough, you know.
Mm.
It's this. Look, it's been a long time, Colin.
Yes, of course,
50
Kate.
years. It's been a long time, and lots of things that I haven't talked about, lots of things that I can't talk about,
Mm.
you know. But there's a whole lot more,
Mm.
more happening because of Bloody Sunday, you know. And
Mm.
you know, it hasn't just finished yet.
Mm.
Finished yet. I would say more to come.
Okay, watch
More
this
to come.
space. Okay.
Watch this space. That's it.
Okay, very good. Eamon, what's your thoughts about that question about what should have been happening? You know, did the trade unions in Britain react, for example, at all? Was there anything like that, or was there a failure on that part? And I suppose I'm asking you, what would your message be to people in Britain, and what they should be doing from here on, what they could do to support family people like the campaign for justice for Bloody Sunday or any other campaign?
Well, they should learn. British people should learn from their own experience, which many do, of course, but as much as from what happened on Bloody Sunday. The reaction in the trade union movement the reaction of the trade union movement in Ireland was disgraceful. It was absolutely disgraceful, despicable, shameful. You know, there was, by sheer coincidence, there was a meeting in Belfast on the 2nd of February, 2 days after Bloody Sunday, which had been called much in advance, of course, months away. There were delegations there from, there's 4 international, I don't know if they still are 4, international trade union federations. All of them were represented at that Belfast meeting. There was all the whole College of Cardinals from the leadership of the British trade union movement. And this was a conference which had been called a few months earlier precisely to deal, to offer a way out of this terrible sectarian clashes which are going on in the north. They met, as I say, on the Tuesday all day in Belfast at the Wellington Hall in Belfast. At the time, 7, there's a curious thing about Bloody Sunday. The 7 of the dead were trade unionists. Yeah. Only 1 of the people killed, or maybe 1 or 2, were unemployed. Now, in a place like Derry, that was unusual, very unusual. But anyway, that's the way it worked out. Not a word was said about the death. There was the bodies of trade unionists lying 70 miles away in the morgue in Outnagelvin. And they had this fucking conference. It wasn't mentioned. It wasn't mentioned at all. Now, a few years after that, there was about 6 years after Bloody Sunday, there was at the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, Derry Trades Council, and the person Paddy Logue, still around, still a friend of mine, Paddy. Paddy tried to move a motion calling upon, the trade union movement to take belated action about Bloody Sunday. And the report in the Irish Times the next day said that there was a deathly silence. Nobody else spoke. Nobody else spoke. Paddy was representative of T&G, now part of Unite. Not a single delegate had anything to say at all. And that was, they were frightened of alienating Protestant workers. That's it, and losing members. And there's a long history of the trade union officialdom not confronting sectarianism in the north. So this was another, just a continuation of that. And it's harrowing to read now, about the fact that right from the beginning there were appeals being made to the trade union leadership. Will you speak out on this? Will you do something about it? Absolute silence. I'll give you an update, which has never been publicised, is that the General Secretary of the Trade Union Movement, I think, was Len Murray. Len Murray had been at the meeting that I've just mentioned in Belfast. He travelled to Derry on the day after that and met with the Secretary of Derry Trades Council, Jackie Nash, it was there, we know to call him, in a room above a pub in Foyle Street in Derry City Centre. His appeal to Derry Trades Council is the head, this fucking General Secretary of the Trade Union Movement, was would they put out a statement, dockers and others in the United States were threatening to black, and did actually for a time, black British ships. Len Murray wanted the Derry Trades Council to put out a statement saying that they didn't support and didn't want this blacking of British goods. He appealed to them. That was a reaction of the leadership of the British trade union movement. And I could multiply that over and over. There's also, we don't intend to go into it, I mean, the question of how people, the conclusions that people drew and so on. In the context, I think you'd have to look also at the Southern Irish ruling class, sort of in Dublin and so on, all of whom were in Derry sort of on Sunday, sort of in reverent memory of the dead of Bloody Sunday. They did fuck all at the time. Nothing. They had this spasm of emotion immediately afterwards, sort of from politicians in the South. After that, for years and years and years, nothing at all. Because they were afraid, like Kate was mentioning there, that even in the North, even among, so to speak, our own people, if I can put it like that, there's a lot of people who thought that the IRA must be involved here somewhere. There's somebody, this just couldn't happen out of the blue. Now, family members did say that. People in Derry and the Bogside, Kate will tell you, when the relatives went around, they're looking for petitions and all the rest of it, sort of in the years after Bloody Sunday happened, there were doors slammed in their faces in the Bogside, in the Creggan estate. I say, you provo bastard and all this here. It's so the propaganda works. That's my point. The propaganda works. So people couldn't believe it. There's judges, the highest in the land, the editors of newspapers and so on. We're all saying, sort of that this wasn't just the Paris and so on, that the IRA must have provoked it. In that situation, if that's what people are reading in the Guardian and the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Telegraph, hearing on the BBC and the ATN News and all the rest of it, if that's been reported as fact, and that shot list that I mentioned earlier, it's just being reported as if that was an accurate account of it. It's understandable. Sort of that people would be suspicious about having anything to do with it. So you had to have some sort of hard politics, either hard socialist politics or hard Republican politics. When you say, no, we're not accepting that sort of thing. The legacy of that is still with us to this day. There's a remarkable sort of numbers of people sort of here as well as everywhere else who don't want to follow through on the Bloody Sunday thing, who don't want to publicly draw the conclusions that the whole British army was implicated here, that the British political establishment was implicated here. Lord Carrington, Minister for Defence, Alec Douglas-Home, who was Home Secretary, Lord Balneil, he was the Minister of State for the Army at the time. Reginald Modley, he's the guy who Bernadette ran across the floor of the House of Commons, sort of at modelling. It didn't hit him half hard enough, but she did give him a dig, sort of, which one of the most popular things sort of, an Irish MP has ever done. They say, yeah, you bastard. So it's I don't know how I started on that, but anyway, there's all that's all part of it.
Very good. I suppose that's the thing, Eamon. Do you feel that there has been sort of that there are sort of traditions of people that have tried to uphold those things in Britain? And do you know what I mean? I suppose I'm sort of asking you. So, what would your final thoughts be to sort of say to anybody who's concerned about Bloody Sunday, who wants to fight, who wants to sort of put themselves on the right side of this against the British establishment? What sort of, do you know what I mean? What sort of things should they be doing? Do you know what I mean? Or what could they do to help?
Yeah. Well, the one thing's about it being the 50th anniversary is that it sort of provides a peg on which you can hang sort of things again on this thing. It should be loads of blizzard of trade union resolutions, sort of things in local groups and so on, and local newspapers that try and get across. And it seems to me that, just in my experience, what needs to be said more than anything else is that this wasn't the result of internal Northern Ireland or internal Irish politics. That it's just Bloody Sunday is commonly fitted into the long list of atrocities in Northern Ireland, committed by loads of people. Provisional IRA did not emerge with clean hands. They're not very, very far from it. I know that there's any of the other parliamentary groups, all of which were anti-democratic, apart from anything else. That's what needs to be insisted on is that Bloody Sunday was carried out by the British state against working class people in Ireland. That's what it was. It wasn't retaliation for IRA bombing or anything like that. They decided that they're going to quieten the people down, going to shut them up, sort of, and that's what we did, sort of. And Bloody Sunday should be seen in that context. That's the lesson. That's the moral, if you like. It has to be drawn sort of by working class people in Britain and their representatives and sort of trade unions and people who regard themselves as socialists or whatever, sort of. This wasn't, the instinct is just say that's to do with Northern Ireland. As I said, that's the most dangerous thing you can think and feel about Bloody Sunday. So it's the lessons are profound, and the lessons are that the British ruling class are the most respectable elements in it. can put up with mass murder. If it's mass murder, if the alternative is to take on the state, if the alternative is to take on the state, to put up an awful lot of people, the entire sort of uniform echelon of British imperialism, sort of in the north, a lot of them.
Eamon, could I say something? Just before we go, Colin.
I was going to come back to you, Kate, but go ahead. You interrupted Eamon, but
it's important to say there's a determination with some to actually end that march that we run, and there's rumors come out we're labelled every year, and the last few years we were getting called dissidents, and this year we've been called Trotskys.
That's right.
But
10,000 Trotskys.
And that's the sort of rumor that comes from the Bloody Sunday Trust. They're the guy that's over them. I think he's over them anyway. He seems to be everywhere. It was him said that, but so always trying to undermine what we're trying to do, and that's the sort of thing you have to put up with, criticism and just rumor, saying bad things about us.
Of course.
But I thought I would let the listeners know that,
Aye, absolutely. And Eamon, any sort of final thoughts yourself there just before we wrap up? Was there anything else that you just didn't get to before you were interrupted by Kate there?
There's a list of
I'm going to interrupt you.
There's a list of at least 100 things.
Yeah, of course.
I'd like to get it. I think that the main thing you should take, that we all should take from Bloody Sunday, is just the naked violence and hatred that's embodied sort of in the armed forces of any capitalist state, and particularly a capitalist state with a record of involvement in imperialism and the crushing of a national aspirations. It's inherently violent. The state is inherently violent of its very nature. Sort of, it is a violent towards working class. Anybody who, what I would take mostly from overall body is that fact that what they were doing is suppressing the rowdy elements among the working class. That's what they had. That's what terrified them, was sort of masses of people, like young people, sort of out demonstrating with stones or whatever. It's they could handle the armed struggle an awful lot better than they could handle 5,000 people on the streets there with their fists up yelling at them. That's what I mainly take from Bloody Sunday is that. And that's what the Brits will be most afraid of. They're not afraid of, really, of, I think of guerrilla tactics and all that. I mean, they can handle that. As I was saying, in there, they've been at that for hundreds of years. They know how to deal with that. Sort of what will give them sort of pause for thought is like what happened sort of in Free Derry and so on, to working class people liberating themselves from the confines sort of a capitalist state and so on. That's the key to everything, of course. It really is.
That's fantastic, Eamon. I think that's all we've got time for tonight. And I want to say a huge thank you to you, Kate, and to Eamon. It was in Derry for the Bloody Sunday weekend. It was incredibly emotional, but also incredibly inspiring. All the work that you're continuing to do in the ongoing campaign for justice. I also want to thank everyone who tuned in. I hope you all take courage and strength and inspiration from what you've heard tonight as well. We're very proud of holding this event tonight and for standing with the campaign for justice for over 50 years, and we'll continue to do so for however long it takes. Thanks once again. I'd just like to end by saying, as people usually do, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow Socialist Worker online, and so on. And thanks again to everybody who joined in, and thanks a million to Kate and Eamon.
Thanks.
Good night.